My name is Samantha Hayes, and I was 19 years old on the day my life cracked open in front of a crowd that was supposed to be celebrating me. The California sky above the Naval Base San Diego was so bright it almost hurt to look at, and the flags snapped in the wind like they were reminding me that I had earned this moment with sweat and discipline. I had just finished the brutal months of Navy training, and this was my promotion and recognition ceremony, the day my name would finally be called with honor. Rows of white chairs lined the parade ground, brass instruments played their steady military hymns, and the air carried the sharp scent of sea salt drifting from the bay. Families filled the seats, their voices low with anticipation, their phones already lifted to capture the moment their loved ones stepped forward. I stood stiff in my uniform shoulders, squared my hands steady at my sides, my heart hammering with a rhythm that matched the drums. The commander's voice rang through the speakers, calling each new sailor. When my name was announced, I felt my chest swell so hard I thought it might burst. This was supposed to be my vindication. My father, Richard, sat in the front row, his face unreadable as always, and beside him was Miranda, my stepmother, her posture rigid. Her lips pressed thin as if she had tasted something bitter. My stepbrother Ethan slouched beside them in a pressed shirt that looked new. His arms crossed, his smirk carved like he already knew something I did not. I braced myself for the family pinning the tradition where loved ones attach the insignia to your uniform. It should have been my father who came forward, a moment of recognition between us after years of distance. Instead, Miranda rose to her feet with a suddenness that startled even the officer standing nearby. She swept up the steps to the podium, her heels clicking against the wooden platform. Before anyone could stop her, she leaned into the microphone, her voice sharp and ringing across the crowd. This honor, she declared, belongs not to Samantha, but to Ethan, the pride of the Hayes family. For a moment, the world stilled. The brass instruments were silent. The chatter evaporated. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me, their expressions caught between confusion and disbelief. My breath froze in my chest. I saw the commander's face tighten, his jaw clench, but he did not move fast enough. Miranda's words echoed like a gavel striking. She had stolen my recognition in front of the entire Navy Hall. I could feel my pulse slamming against my throat, my vision tunneling as humiliation mixed with rage. This was not a mistake or a slip of the tongue. This was deliberate, calculated, a public erasure. I was frozen between the instinct drilled into me to maintain composure and the desperate urge to scream. The American flag flapped above me, a cruel reminder that I was supposed to be the one honored for discipline and resilience, and instead, my stepmother had rewritten the script as if I did not exist. In that breathless silence, the foundation of everything I had fought for trembled, and I understood that what was about to unfold would change the story of my family forever. The words had barely settled over the crowd when something inside me snapped. I heard my own voice sharper than I had ever allowed it to be cut through the stunned silence. This is my promotion, not his. The declaration trembled on the air, yet carried enough force to make people in the first rows flinch. Miranda's head whipped toward me, her eyes narrowing with the fury of someone who had been publicly challenged. For a second, I thought she would retreat embarrassed, but instead she moved with a swiftness that shocked even me. She descended from the podium, her heels striking against the wood, each step a hammer falling toward me. The commander began to shift forward, but it was already too late. She reached me, her face twisted in disdain, and before I could even take a step back, her hand lashed across my face. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the stillness of the ceremony. Heat exploded along my cheek, the sting burning deeper than anything I had felt in months of training. My vision blurred as the world gasped. The audience erupted into a ripple of shocked voices. A sharp, metallic taste filled my mouth where the inside of my cheek had split. I swayed, but forced myself upright, my uniform still rigid, my spine straight, even as the mark blossomed red across my skin. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Ethan leaning back in his chair, his lips curled in a grin that was almost celebratory, as if my humiliation was the entertainment he had been waiting for. I had expected anger, maybe harsh words, but not this. Not in front of hundreds of sailors, officers, and families. My stepmother had not just shamed me in private. She had raised her hand against me in the heart of a military base in the middle of a ceremony meant to mark my belonging. Phones were already lifted. I caught the glow of a red recording light, the reflection of my own shock flickering across a screen. Someone near the front whispered, "She slapped her." Another voice answered, "Did that really just happen here?" The commander barked an order, and two officers moved quickly to separate Miranda from me, guiding her backward, but the damage had already been done. My cheek throbbed with every heartbeat, yet deeper than the pain was the roar of humiliation, the knowledge that every person here would carry this image home. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to run, but my body held fast in the posture I had drilled into my muscles. Shoulders back, chin level, eyes forward. It was both my shield and my curse. I stood frozen, a statue in uniform, while my insides tore apart. A murmur swept through the families seated behind me. Some looked away, ashamed to have witnessed it. Others leaned in, eager for more spectacle. Ethan finally uncrossed his arms and clapped once, slowly, sarcastically, a sound that made bile rise in my throat. The commander's voice rang out, ordering silence, but the spell of dignity had already been broken. I reached up with trembling fingers, touched the heat blooming across my cheek, and when I pulled my hand away, there was a faint smear that made my stomach tighten. The symbol of my stepmother's control had been etched in front of everyone. The officers ushered Miranda back to her seat, her expression satisfied, as though she had achieved some dark victory. Richard sat motionless beside her, his gaze fixed forward, unwilling to meet mine. That refusal hurt more than the slap itself. I felt the sting in my face, the fire in my chest, and the cold realization that I stood alone in this family, even in front of witnesses. Yet a thread of something unexpected ran beneath the pain. It was not defeat. It was not surrender. It was the flicker of defiance, the recognition that the moment her hand connected with my face, she had exposed not me, but herself. And as the chatter grew louder, as the recording lights blinked, as the officers struggled to restore order, I held onto that thought like a lifeline. She thought she had silenced me. Instead, she had given me the first undeniable proof that I was right to resist. I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, a city where the ocean seemed to press against every street, and the presence of the Navy was stitched into daily life. Our house sat only a few miles from Naval Station Norfolk, the largest naval base in the world, and the sight of uniformed men and women heading to duty was as common to me as school buses on the corner. From the outside, our home looked ordinary, a two-story brick house with a trimmed lawn and a flag hanging neatly by the porch. Inside, though, the air was divided into lines that were invisible to strangers, but painfully sharp to me. My father, Richard, worked long hours as an engineer for a shipbuilding company, and when he was home, his silence was heavier than his presence. My stepmother, Miranda, ran the house with a smile that looked sweet to outsiders, but tightened into iron the moment the door closed. Her son, Ethan, was the sun in her sky, and she made sure the whole household revolved around him. I was the shadow pressed to the edges. The differences started small, so small I used to question whether I was imagining them. When Ethan turned 12, he unwrapped a brand new Xbox with the kind of squeal that filled the whole living room. My father ruffled his hair with pride, and Miranda beamed as though her boy had just been accepted to college. That same year, I asked to attend a STEM summer camp that my teacher had recommended a chance to explore robotics and coding. Miranda tilted her head, her smile thin. "That is a waste of money, Samantha. You should focus on things girls are good at." My father did not argue. He only muttered something about budgets and walked away. I learned early that Ethan's desires were considered investments, while mine were indulgences. The pattern hardened as we grew. Ethan wanted a new mountain bike. Within a week, it was leaning against the garage wall, gleaming in red paint. I needed a new pair of shoes for gym class and was told to make do with the ones whose soles were already splitting. When relatives came to visit during Thanksgiving, they crowded around Ethan, laughing at his jokes, admiring his charm, telling him he had leadership written all over him. When their eyes finally flicked toward me, the questions were always the same. "Do you have a boyfriend yet, Samantha? Are you helping your stepmother with the cooking?" My science projects and math trophies never found their way into those conversations. Miranda had a way of twisting even my smallest victories into warnings. When I came home with an award from a regional math competition, she said softly, "Do not brag too much. Boys will not like you if you act too smart." I was 14. I remember holding that certificate in my hand and feeling it shrink into something shameful. Ethan, meanwhile, could stumble through a piano recital and still be praised as gifted. The message was constant and clear. His smallest effort was talent. My greatest effort was a problem. By the time I was 16, I had a part-time job shelving books at the public library. The money was meant for college savings for the independence I craved. Instead, it became the family's backup wallet. When Ethan wanted new cleats for soccer, Miranda suggested I contribute. When prom came around, I was told it would be a lovely gesture if I covered his tuxedo rental. "It will show sisterly love," she said with that smile that was really a command. Each time I handed over the bills, hoping for a scrap of recognition, but it never came. Ethan would hug me once and then brag to his friends that his sister always took care of him. I remember sitting in my room after those nights staring at the empty envelope that had once held my savings, listening to his laughter drift through the walls. I began to realize that love in our household was measured in sacrifice, and sacrifice was measured in how much I could give up for Ethan. My ambition was never nurtured. My boundaries were never respected. I was expected to be silent, compliant, and useful, and the more I gave, the more invisible I became. As the years passed, the imbalance was no longer something hidden. It was obvious to neighbors, to teachers, even to my friends, who quietly asked why Ethan always seemed to get what he wanted while I was told no. The answer was written into the rhythm of our household. Ethan was the miracle child the boy Miranda adored, and my father tolerated with pride. I was the extra, the reminder of a marriage that no longer existed. When Ethan turned 16, a shiny used Jeep appeared in the driveway, balloons tied to the antenna, relatives clapping as though he had just won an Olympic medal. That same year, I was accepted into an advanced placement program at school. My reward was a card with a $50 bill tucked inside. "Congratulations," they said, "but it is a shame you will be so far from home." Their voices were flat, as though my success was an inconvenience. I retreated into books because they did not punish me for wanting more. Math and science became my refuge, the clean certainty of equations offering a logic my home never did. At night, I would spread textbooks across my bed, solving problem sets until my eyelids grew heavy. For a few hours, I could believe that effort and intelligence mattered more than favoritism, but even that private joy was invaded. Miranda would knock on the door and say, "You are too serious, Samantha. No man will want a wife who spends her nights with textbooks." The words carved deep, planting doubt where pride should have grown. The favoritism was not only emotional or financial, it was spiritual, woven into every rule of our family. At the dinner table, Ethan could interrupt my father and be praised for confidence. If I asked a question, I was told to mind my tone. When chores were divided, Ethan was excused because of practice or homework. I was handed the list and told it built character. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every holiday repeated the same script. Ethan celebrated, Samantha corrected. By the time I stood at the edge of high school graduation, I had already learned a dangerous lesson. Silence was survival. If I argued, I was punished. If I resisted, I was shamed. So I buried my anger deep, storing it in layers I thought no one could see. I smiled for photographs. I nodded at relatives. I became the dutiful daughter who did not ask for more. But inside, I made a vow. One day, I would leave. One day, I would carve out a life where my worth was not defined by how much I could sacrifice for Ethan. That vow carried me like a secret engine, pushing me toward the only escape I could imagine: the Navy. The vow I made in high school did not vanish when graduation came. It burned brighter. Every fight at home, every dismissal from Miranda, every smirk from Ethan pushed me closer to the edge of decision. While my classmates filled out college applications and planned campus tours, I searched for something that would cut me free from the chains of my house in Norfolk. The answer came to me during my junior year when a recruiter visited Norview High School. He wore his uniform with a kind of pride that seemed unshakable, and when he spoke about honor service and independence, I felt something inside me stir. It was the first time I imagined a future where discipline and effort would actually be rewarded. I joined JROTC not long after that visit, slipping into the stiff cadet uniform that smelled faintly of starch and dust. At first, I felt awkward, a girl trying to stand tall in boots too big for her. But then the rhythm of drills, the snap of commands, and the unity of marching in formation began to carve away the uncertainty. For the first time, no one asked if I had a boyfriend or if I was too serious. They asked if I could hold the line, if I could endure the cold, if I could keep my voice steady under pressure. The questions themselves felt like freedom. At home, of course, Miranda sneered. "Girls do not belong in the Navy," she said, her tone dripping with scorn. Ethan laughed outright when he saw me practicing drills in the backyard. "You will not last a week. You will come crawling back." Their mockery only tightened my resolve. I clung to the idea that the Navy could be my doorway out of a life where I was invisible. When I signed the enlistment papers for Navy boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois, my hands trembled, but not from fear. It was exhilaration. This was the first decision I had made entirely for myself. I did not tell Miranda until the paperwork was complete, and when I did, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about me wasting everyone's time. Richard said nothing, simply folded the newspaper and walked out of the room. Ethan grinned as though I had set myself up for failure. That silence and scorn became the wind at my back. Boot camp was brutal, exactly as I hoped it would be. We ran 5 miles through sleet that stung our faces raw. We swam rescue drills until our arms felt like lead. We broke down rifles, assembled them again, then broke them down once more until the motions were burned into our bones. I remember one freezing morning when we stood ankle-deep in snow rifles across our chests, the wind cutting like knives. My breath came out in white bursts, my legs shook, and I thought I might collapse. Then a chief petty officer walked past, his voice booming. "Hayes, you have steel in your spine." That single sentence lit me up inside. For the first time, someone in authority saw me as strong, not as selfish or too much. It was not easy. The exhaustion was constant. My body ached in places I did not know could ache. But every day I finished what was demanded. Every night I lay in the barracks, knowing I had done something my family never believed I could. The Navy became my proof, a shield and a weapon against years of dismissal. The longer I stayed in boot camp, the more I understood that the Navy was not just training me to endure, it was teaching me how to live. Every push-up, every shouted order, every midnight inspection stripped away the voice of Miranda telling me I was wasting money, or the smirk of Ethan reminding me I was second best. In their place grew something harder, something sharper. Resilience. I carried bruises on my arms from rifle drills, blisters on my feet, from endless marches, and salt burns on my skin from survival swims, but none of it felt like punishment. It felt like proof that I could take the pain and keep moving forward. There were moments when I faltered. One night during week 6, we had been awake for nearly 20 hours. My body shook with fatigue as we crawled through the mud under barbed wire while cold rain soaked us to the bone. I wanted to stop to lay down in the muck and let the exhaustion drown me. But then I remembered Miranda's words, the smirk on Ethan's face, the silence of my father when I told him I had enlisted. Quitting would hand them victory. I forced myself forward, dragging my knees through the mud until the course was finished. When I stood at the end, chest heaving, I knew I had left another layer of their control behind. By the time I reached graduation, my body was leaner, my spirit steadier. I wore my uniform with pride, the insignia catching the light like a promise. My fellow recruits clapped me on the back, calling me Hayes, with a kind of respect that was new and addictive. For once, I was not the invisible one. I was part of something bigger, and my contribution mattered. When I called home to share the news, Miranda only laughed. She said I was playing soldier. Ethan asked if I had managed to keep my hair clean in the mud. My father grunted, asking nothing about my achievements. Their reactions hurt, but they no longer defined me. The applause of my peers, the nod of my commanding officer, the feeling of standing tall in uniform, all of that outweighed the absence of their pride. I carried that fire with me when I received my first assignment at Naval Base San Diego. The base was massive, bustling with sailors' ships and a rhythm of life that hummed with purpose. I felt both small and powerful walking those docks, inhaling the scent of salt water and oil, knowing I was part of something that mattered. My days were long and demanding, but unlike the demands of home, they were fair. Effort was met with recognition, discipline with respect. For the first time, I felt that my boundaries were protected, my worth acknowledged. That sense of belonging, that fragile pride, is why the ceremony at San Diego meant so much to me. It was not just about a promotion, it was about proof that I had escaped the gravity of Norfolk and the household that had tried to keep me small. It was the culmination of years of swallowing humiliation and channeling it into discipline. And that is why, when Miranda stole the microphone and rewrote my story, it cut so deep. Because the Navy had become my sanctuary, the place where my effort was finally visible, and she had invaded it with the same cruelty she used to rule our home. The sting on my cheek had not faded when I forced myself to lock my knees and steady my breath. The band had fallen silent. The commander's face was carved in stone. Families shifted in their seats, whispering to each other, their eyes darting between Miranda, who sat smugly now, and me, standing at rigid attention with a flush spreading across my face. I tasted blood on my tongue, bitter and metallic, and yet I refused to break posture. Inside, I was shaking, but outside, I was the sailor they expected me to be. That contrast was the only armor I had left. Miranda leaned toward the microphone again, her voice syrupy now, her words sharp beneath the surface. Samantha agreed to dedicate this to Ethan. That was her choice. I felt a fresh wave of heat rise to my face, but it was not from the slap. It was rage. She had not only humiliated me physically, she was rewriting the truth in real time, bending the story to fit the same narrative I had lived through all my childhood. Ethan the pride, Samantha the shadow. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. A cousin who had flown in from Virginia whispered loudly enough for me to hear ungrateful. Another guest shook her head and muttered that poor boy deserves it more. My stomach clenched. I wanted to scream that none of them had seen the years of sacrifice, the nights of labor, the money stolen from me to fund Ethan's whims. They saw only the polished story Miranda spun, and now she had carried that lie onto Navy ground. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug half-moons into my palms. I could not allow myself to lose control. Then, faint but steady, I heard a voice just behind me. "Stand tall, Hayes. The Navy is watching." It was one of my fellow sailors, a young woman I had trained beside in Illinois. Her words cut through the fog of humiliation like a lifeline. I drew in a long breath, forced my spine straighter, and fixed my eyes forward. If Miranda thought she had broken me, she would not see it. The commander finally stepped forward, his voice clipped, commanding silence. "This ceremony is about service, not spectacle," he said, his eyes flashing toward Miranda. But the damage had already been carved into the day. Phones had captured it. Clips were already uploading. The audience could not unsee what had happened. I was no longer just a sailor being recognized. I was the girl in uniform whose stepmother had slapped her across the face on federal property. I stood there with the ceremony still dragging itself forward, my ears ringing with fragments of whispers and gasps, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might split my chest. I thought of Norfolk, of the living room where Ethan unwrapped gifts while I was told to be quiet. I thought of the library paychecks I had handed over for his tuxedo, the words Miranda had thrown at me like stones. And now, here I was, 19 years old, standing on a base where I had fought for respect, and she had dragged me back into the shadows with a single hand. But as I stood there holding my ground, I made a vow to myself as fierce as the one I had made at 16. This time, I would not swallow it. This time, I would not hide in silence. The ceremony limped forward, as if nothing had happened, but the air had changed. Every eye that turned toward me carried judgment or pity, and every camera lens felt like a spotlight pinning me in place. I could still hear the echo of that slap, sharp and undeniable, vibrating through my bones. My cheek burned swollen and tender, but worse than the sting was the silence of my father. Richard sat unmoving in his chair, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed straight ahead as if none of it concerned him. That silence cut deeper than Miranda's hand ever could. I caught Ethan's gaze across the aisle. He leaned back in his chair, a smug curve tugging at his lips, his expression saying, without words, that this had always been the plan. He had grown up taking from me, and now in front of the Navy he was doing it again, secure in the knowledge that Miranda would defend him, and Richard would do nothing. My stomach twisted. I wanted to confront him, to shout across the room that he had stolen enough, but I forced my jaw shut. My commander's words echoed in my mind, "Discipline is strength." Still, discipline could not erase the humiliation. Every time a phone lifted, I imagined the clip already spreading captions forming "Stepmother slaps sailor at promotion ceremony." I could already see the comments, people laughing, people mocking. The nightmare would follow me far beyond this parade ground. The thought made my pulse spike, but beneath the fear was something sharper. Anger. Miranda thought she had cemented her control, but she had underestimated the one thing the Navy had drilled into me: resilience under fire. As the last names were called and the applause faltered into polite claps, the ceremony ended. Officers moved to restore order, guiding families out, but the whispers traveled faster than the crowd. I heard fragments. "Selfish disgrace, poor boy," interspersed with others that was wrong. Did you see her face? She stood tall. The division mirrored the split inside me. Half of me wanted to collapse into tears. The other half wanted to stand taller and prove them all wrong. When the commander dismissed us, I marched with the others, my movement stiff but steady. My cheek ached, my throat burned with words I had not spoken, but I held my head high. I refused to give Miranda the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. As the crowd filtered out, I caught sight of a young sailor near the back lowering his phone. His eyes met mine, and he gave a small nod as if to say, "It is recorded, the truth is safe." The thought settled into me like a seed. The evidence existed. The world would see what really happened. That night, alone in my barracks room, I stared at my reflection in the small mirror bolted to the wall. A red mark bloomed across my cheek, faint bruising already beginning to form. I touched it lightly, flinching at the pain, but I did not look away. For years, Miranda's cruelty had been hidden behind closed doors, whispered away as family discipline or dismissed as exaggeration. But now the mark was visible, undeniable on Navy ground. For the first time in my life, I had proof that could not be twisted into another story. I sat down on the narrow bunk, pulled out my phone, and scrolled. Notifications exploded across the screen. Clips already had hundreds of shares, thousands of views. My humiliation was spreading, but so was the truth. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the shame and the ache, a single thought rose like a flare against the night. This time, they will not bury me in silence. This time, the world will know. I barely slept that night. The mark on my cheek pulsed with every heartbeat, a reminder of the humiliation that had unfolded under the harsh light of ceremony. But it was not the pain that kept me awake. It was the replay of the moment, the gasp of the crowd, the way Miranda's hand had cracked against my face, Ethan's smirk in the background, and my father's silence. Again and again, the scene rolled in my mind until I thought I would lose my breath. Yet, between those memories, another image kept pushing through, the sailor lowering his phone, the red recording light glowing steady. Proof. For the first time, there was proof. By morning, the clip had exploded online. I woke to a phone buzzing with notifications stacked like bricks. Friends from training, classmates from high school, even numbers I did not recognize were flooding my screen. Some messages carried words of support. Others were blunt questions. Was that really your stepmother? Did that really happen on base? I scrolled through one link, then another, until I saw myself on the screen, stiff in uniform, my face twisting as the slap landed, the crowd erupting. I could not stop watching it. Every frame was humiliation, but every frame was also evidence. I knew one thing instantly. If I stayed silent now, Miranda would spin it the same way she always had. She would tell relatives I had agreed. She would claim it was a misunderstanding. She would rewrite the truth until I was the selfish daughter again. That could not happen. Not this time. So I walked to the JAG office, the Judge Advocate General's department that handles legal matters for service members. The office smelled of paper and coffee, the walls lined with certificates and flags. I sat across from a lieutenant whose eyes were sharp but not unkind. I told him everything, my voice trembling at first, then steadying as the story poured out. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. "Assault on federal property is a serious matter," he said. The words hit me harder than I expected. Assault. It was not just family drama. It was a crime. The lieutenant asked for the video and I handed over the link with shaking hands. He watched in silence, his jaw tightening as the slap replayed across his screen. "This is clear evidence," he said finally. "If you choose, we can press charges." I felt the weight of those words settle over me. Charges. My stepmother had struck me before in private, but never had there been the possibility of real consequences. The thought both terrified and electrified me. I returned to my barracks and began gathering everything I had. Text messages where Miranda had mocked me for joining the Navy. Old emails where she demanded I cover Ethan's expenses. Photographs of Ethan's Jeep purchased while I was told to be content with nothing. Each piece was another brick in the wall. I was building a wall of truth that she could not break through with her smile or her lies. That night, as I spread the evidence across my desk, I felt a shift deep inside. For years, I had been on the defensive, enduring swallowing, hiding. Now, for the first time, I was preparing to fight back. The thought scared me, but it also lit something fierce in my chest. Miranda had struck me thinking it would silence me. Instead, she had given me the weapon I needed. I slept in fits, my mind rehearsing every possible response until dawn. The lieutenant at JAG had been direct. "We can file charges," he said, "or we can pursue administrative actions that protect your safety and career. Either way, do not go it alone." Those words lodged in me like an order I could follow. I began calling people, carefully choosing allies who understood the stakes. I told Lieutenant Morales, the officer who had overseen my division. He listened and said he would stand by me and put me in touch with others who could help. Then I met with the JAG lieutenant to map our approach. He explained the process: evidence would be logged, statements taken, and a decision made about charges. He advised caution about publicity, warning that social media could spin the story in unpredictable ways. I told him I wanted the truth to be undeniable and protected by law. He agreed to be present as an observer and to coordinate with my commander. We built a plan with military clarity. I would attend the family reception not as a broken girl, but as a sailor with legal backing and witnesses. I would bring 2 fellow sailors, Lieutenant Morales as an observer, and a simple presentation, the clip of the slap, a clear timeline of events and messages that showed Miranda's pattern of coercion. The idea was not to humiliate for sport, but to demonstrate a pattern and force a public reckoning. If family and friends could watch the footage and see the truth, the room would have to confront what had happened instead of letting Miranda rewrite it. Preparing the presentation was grueling in its own way. I collected texts and old receipts, photographed the Jeep that had appeared in our driveway the year I was told to save for college, and saved screenshots of messages where Miranda belittled my ambitions. Every piece felt like pulling back the curtain on a life I had once tried to keep private. I rehearsed what I would say, the exact phrases to keep my voice measured. I practiced remaining calm if Miranda cried or if relatives turned on me. My goal was to let evidence do the speaking while I held steady. The toughest part was facing the moral weight. I did not relish the thought of my father losing business or Ethan being shamed, but I could not let their reputations be built on lies and violence. I had been trained to accept consequences in the Navy, to take responsibility. Seeking justice for myself was another form of duty, a commitment to truth that outweighed comfort. On the morning of the reception, I dressed simply, letting the bruise on my cheek be visible as proof. My 2 sailors and Lieutenant Morales accompanied me. When the gathering slowed and dessert was being served, I asked for the microphone. I felt my pulse in my throat, the room narrowing to the faces I had known all my life. I began, my voice steady but low. "There is something you all need to see," I said. Then I played the clip. The room went quiet in a way that felt like falling through air. The footage replayed the slap, the gasp from the crowd, the stunned faces. For a beat, no one moved. Then the questions, the murmurs, the phones lifted again to capture the replay. Miranda's practiced smile faltered. Her mouth opened and then closed. People shifted in their chairs. The power had tilted. I stood there, not triumphant, not vindictive, but resolute, holding the line of truth while the world I had been forced to carry shifted beneath me. The invitation came wrapped in pretense. A week after the ceremony, Miranda announced she would be hosting a celebration at a hotel ballroom on the Virginia Beach oceanfront. Officially, it was for Ethan's achievements, though everyone knew it was meant to reclaim control of the story that had already escaped her hands. Clips of the slap were spreading across the country under the hashtag #SlappedAtPromotion. News anchors debated whether families had any place interfering in military recognition. Some called me a victim. Others questioned if the video had been misunderstood. I stayed quiet, letting the tide build. Silence was no longer submission. It was strategy. When the evening arrived, the sky above the boardwalk was streaked pink and orange, the ocean a restless shadow beyond the glass windows of the hotel. I walked into the ballroom with 2 fellow sailors at my side and Lieutenant Morales just behind me. I was not there as a daughter. I was there as a sailor prepared to stand her ground. My uniform was pressed, my boots polished the bruise on my cheek, still faintly visible. Every step I took across the carpeted floor reminded me of the hours I had spent crawling through mud and ice at boot camp. That training had been for moments like this to stand tall when my body wanted to fold. The room buzzed with low conversation as relatives and acquaintances picked at plates of catered food. Crystal chandeliers gleamed overhead, casting a golden glow that could not hide the tension. I saw Miranda at the center pearls gleaming at her throat, smiling too widely as she welcomed guests. Ethan hovered nearby, his posture stiff but his grin intact. My father stood a few steps behind them, shoulders stooped, gaze distant as though he had already resigned himself to whatever storm was brewing. When Miranda noticed me, her smile faltered for the briefest second before returning sharper thinner. "Samantha," she said loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, "I am so glad you decided to join us." Her voice was sugar, but her eyes were knives. I felt every gaze in the room shift toward me, some curious, some wary, a few openly hostile. I did not flinch. I walked forward until I reached the microphone set at the center of the room. Without asking permission, I placed my hand on it. The feedback squealed, pulling silence over the crowd like a curtain. "There is something you all need to see," I said. My voice was steady, practiced, honed by the hours I had spent preparing. Then I lifted the small remote in my hand and pressed the button. Behind me, a screen flickered to life. The clip played in sharp, undeniable detail, Miranda's hand arcing across my face, the crack of impact, the crowd gasping. The ballroom froze. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses trembled in hands. The truth was no longer whispered or doubted. It was alive on the wall in front of them all. The silence in the ballroom was suffocating. The clip ended with the frozen image of my face, my cheek already swelling, my body rigid in uniform while the crowd gasped around me. No one could look away. A cousin covered her mouth with both hands. An older uncle shook his head slowly. Even guests who had whispered against me days earlier now stared at Miranda with open disbelief. The truth was raw, undeniable, and it hung in the air heavier than the chandelier light. Miranda shot to her feet, her pearls rattling against each other as her chest heaved. "This is a family matter!" She shouted, her voice sharp, trying to reclaim control through sheer volume. The words rang hollow. I turned to face her fully, my chin lifted, my hands steady at my sides. "No, I said it became public the moment you struck me in uniform on Navy ground." The murmur of agreement that rippled through the crowd was quiet at first, but it grew like a wave. Heads nodded, eyes narrowed. Someone whispered, "She hit her on base." That is not just family. That is criminal. My father finally stirred, his voice low, but trembling with anger. "You had no right to bring this here," he said, his gaze fixed on me as if I had committed the greater sin. I swallowed the ache in my throat and answered evenly. "You had no right to stay silent when she hit me." His jaw clenched, but he had no reply. For the first time, the weight of his silence was not crushing me. It was exposing him. Miranda tried again, her tone shrill, now cracking under the pressure. "She is ungrateful. She has been poisoned by this so-called career. Look at what she is doing to this family." Her words were the same weapons she had always used, but this time they landed differently. The evidence on the screen had already shifted the battlefield. A man at the back called out, "We all saw it." A woman near the front whispered loudly, "That is not ungrateful. That is survival." Ethan fidgeted at Miranda's side, tugging at his collar, the smirk gone. His eyes darted from the screen to the crowd, and for once he looked small. I felt the tension in my chest ease just slightly enough to let me speak again. I faced the guests, not Miranda, not Richard, but the entire room. "I have carried this for years," I said. "Every dismissal, every sacrifice, every time my worth was erased so Ethan could shine. You all were told stories that made me look selfish, ungrateful, invisible. But now you have seen the truth. The evidence speaks for itself." The ballroom was silent again, but this time it was not the silence of doubt. It was the silence of judgment falling, of loyalties shifting. People who had once muttered against me now avoided Miranda's eyes. Others looked at me with something close to respect. The balance had tipped. Lieutenant Morales stepped forward, then his uniform, a quiet declaration of authority. "What happened at Naval Base San Diego is not just disgraceful. It is subject to investigation," he said firmly. The words landed like a gavel. Miranda sank back into her chair, her hands trembling against the tablecloth. Richard's face drained of color. Ethan stared at the floor. I held my ground, my breath steady, my shoulders square. For the first time in my life, I was not reacting. I was leading. The girl who had been silenced in Norfolk was gone. In her place stood a sailor with evidence allies and the strength to confront the storm head-on. And in that ballroom, under the cold glitter of the chandeliers, the Hayes family facade finally cracked wide open. By the next morning, the confrontation in Virginia Beach was no longer confined to the ballroom. The clip of Miranda's slap played on the giant screen had been recorded again by half a dozen phones. Those videos spread online faster than a storm surge hitting the shore. By sunrise, local news stations were replaying the footage with bold captions, "Stepmother slaps sailor at promotion ceremony." The hashtag #slapped@promotion climbed the trending lists first in Virginia, then across the country. I had braced for humiliation, but what came instead was a tidal wave of outrage. Strangers on social media demanded accountability. Veterans wrote that no service member should be dishonored on base. Mothers commented that if anyone had struck their daughter like that, they would have pressed charges immediately. The Navy could not ignore it either. That same week, the base commander released a statement. "The United States Navy does not tolerate the abuse of its sailors." The words were formal but carried the weight of protection. For once, the institution I had trusted to honor effort stood firmly behind me. My stepmother, who once controlled every narrative in our household, now faced a narrative she could not twist. Consequences arrived quickly. My father's company, Newport News Shipbuilding, came under scrutiny. Clients called asking whether he condoned violence on federal property. Contracts worth millions suddenly froze. A luxury condominium project in Norfolk that he had been boasting about collapsed within days when investors pulled their funding. Richard tried to insist it was a misunderstanding, but each time he spoke, the video replayed beside him on the evening news. His denials looked pitiful against the sharp crack of the slap. Ethan felt the collapse in his own way. The scholarship he had just secured at Old Dominion University was rescinded after administrators faced pressure from outraged parents. Photos of him smirking during the ceremony circulated online, fueling anger. A clip surfaced of him laughing with friends afterward, bragging that I would get over it and that the Navy would protect him because he was family of a veteran engineer. That clip spread almost as fast as the slap itself. His teammates on the university soccer squad distanced themselves. His girlfriend posted a blunt message on Instagram, "I cannot stand with someone who thinks abuse is a joke." Within days, he deleted his accounts, retreating into silence. And then there was Miranda. She had always been careful to polish her image, the devoted stepmother, the polite hostess, the woman who volunteered for church committees. But now her face was everywhere as the toxic stepmom who slapped her stepdaughter in uniform. Memes mocked her pearl necklace. Commenters flooded her Facebook page until she shut it down. News anchors dissected her words from the reception, replaying her cries of ungrateful against the visible bruise on my face. She became a symbol of cruelty dressed as motherhood, and no amount of denial could soften it. For me, the whirlwind was overwhelming. My phone buzzed every hour with messages from strangers offering solidarity. Former classmates reached out to apologize for never seeing what I had endured. Colleagues at the base stopped me in the hall, some with nods of respect, others with quiet words. "You stood tall." That meant more than they could know. Yet in the quiet of my barracks room, with the glow of my phone lighting the darkness, I wrestled with waves of conflicting emotions. The validation was powerful, but so was the ache. I had not asked to become a public symbol. I had simply demanded dignity. Now my story was out of my hands, amplified in headlines and hashtags dissected by voices I had never met. The public tide did not slow. National outlets soon picked up the story, moving it from regional scandal to nightly headlines. CNN ran the clip in slow motion, analysts debating not only the slap, but the culture of favoritism and control inside families. Talk shows discussed whether loyalty to family could ever excuse humiliation. Every time the video replayed, my name appeared beneath it, no longer just a sailor, but a figure in a broader conversation about boundaries. I had never imagined my private pain would become public debate. The legal system moved in parallel. With guidance from the JAG office, I filed a formal report. Miranda was summoned for questioning. The sight of her name on official paperwork felt surreal, like crossing a line I had never dared before. The lieutenant explained that because the assault happened on federal property, the case carried weight beyond family disputes. She could face charges of assault against a service member. That phrase alone stunned me. A stepmother who had once dismissed me as insignificant now stood vulnerable before the very laws she believed she could ignore. Richard tried to intervene quietly, calling in favors from old colleagues, insisting this was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But the Navy was firm, a statement of neutrality, no interference. His voice, once commanding in our household, now fell flat against the institution's discipline. For the first time, his silence and excuses could not protect Miranda or Ethan. The fallout at home worsened. Neighbors who once waved politely now crossed the street to avoid Miranda. At the grocery store, a woman shouted shame, and cameras caught the moment, replaying it online until it became another meme. Invitations to social gatherings vanished. Even church committees that Miranda had led quietly replaced her name. She had spent years curating respectability, and in less than a month it crumbled. Ethan retreated further. His friends stopped answering calls, his job applications stalled once his last name was recognized. Rumors spread that he was considering leaving Virginia altogether. Yet even then, Miranda defended him, insisting he was the true victim. Her words rang empty against the footage of him smirking in the ceremony hall. For me, the storm was double-edged. I faced attention I had not asked for, interview requests. I declined articles that picked apart my childhood, based on fragments of public record. Yet at the same time, I felt a surge of strength I had never known. I was no longer invisible. My voice carried. My refusal to stay silent had become a rallying point for others who had endured toxic families. Letters arrived from women in uniform, from men estranged from parents, from teenagers saving to escape households that resembled my own. Each message reminded me that my story was not isolated. The most profound shift, however, was internal. I no longer measured myself against Miranda's scorn or Ethan's smirk. Their power had dissolved under the weight of evidence and consequence. For years, I had believed my worth could only be proven through sacrifice. Now I saw that dignity was not earned by giving until empty. It was claimed by saying no, by demanding respect, even when voices called you selfish. The slap had not ended me. It had begun me. In the weeks after the confrontation in Virginia Beach, I began to feel something I had not known since childhood, air that was entirely mine to breathe. The noise of public debate still swirled around me. Clips replaying on television, strangers dissecting every expression on my face, articles speculating about the fate of the Hayes family. But within my own skin, I felt a fragile steadiness taking root. For the first time, the story no longer belonged to Miranda or Richard or Ethan. It belonged to me. The bruise on my cheek faded slowly, shifting from red to purple to the faint yellow of healing. Each morning, when I looked in the mirror, I touched the tender skin and reminded myself this mark was proof, not shame. It marked the moment when silence ended. It marked the choice to stand. In the Navy, we are taught that scars are part of service, visible signs of survival. Mine had not come from battle overseas, but it was battle all the same, one fought in the open where truth finally had witnesses. Support poured in from places I never expected. Fellow sailors left notes in my locker. "Stay strong, Hayes." Veterans wrote letters, some typed, others scrawled by hand, telling me they had endured their own dismissals and that my refusal to bow had inspired them. I even received an email from a retired admiral's wife who said she wished she had found her voice decades earlier. Each message added another layer of strength over the rawness that lingered. The Navy responded in its own way, too. I was offered the chance to speak at a regional leadership forum in Washington, D.C., a gathering of officers, sailors, and civilian advocates. At first, I hesitated. Standing in front of hundreds again felt unbearable. But then I remembered the hush in the ballroom when the clip played the way the truth could silence lies. I accepted. When I stepped onto that stage weeks later, the lights glaring against my uniform, I told them what I had learned, that loyalty is not measured by silence, that family does not excuse abuse, and that boundaries are not selfish. When I finished, the applause rose steady and strong, not for spectacle, but for solidarity. Back in San Diego, I found myself building a life that was finally mine. With my savings and a modest loan, I purchased a small apartment in the Gaslamp Quarter. It was nothing extravagant, a 2-bedroom with wide windows that opened toward the bay, but it felt like a fortress. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every dish in the cabinet was mine, untouched by the demands of Miranda or the indifference of Richard. When I turned the key in the lock each night, the click was a reminder that my space, my safety, and my story were no longer negotiable. I poured my energy into something bigger than myself, too. With encouragement from mentors, I launched a foundation called No Bruises, No Silence, aimed at supporting young men and women from toxic households who wanted to pursue careers in service or STEM. The name carried the weight of my vow, a reminder that silence was the soil where cruelty grew. Applications began arriving, letters from teenagers in small towns, emails from college students on the edge of giving up. Reading their words, I felt my own suffering transform into something with purpose. Even in the quiet, even in the solitude of my apartment, I no longer felt invisible. The isolation that had once defined my life was replaced with connection built on honesty. My scars, faint though they were, became a map back to myself. Healing was not a straight line. There were nights when the memories of Norfolk came back so vividly I had to press my palms against my eyes to block them out. I would see Ethan unwrapping gifts while I sat empty-handed, hear Miranda's voice telling me girls did not belong in the Navy, feel my father's silence pressing like a weight on my chest. The slap in San Diego had not erased those years. It had only dragged them into the light. Therapy became my anchor. Sitting in a small office near the harbor, I told my story to a counselor who never once called me selfish or dramatic. She reminded me that boundaries were not walls of cruelty, but lines of survival. Each session helped me untangle the years of sacrifice I had mistaken for love. I practiced small acts of saying no. Declining invitations I did not want, refusing extra tasks when my plate was already full, choosing rest over appeasement. At first, guilt clawed at me. I half expected Miranda's voice to explode through the phone, demanding explanation. But the calls never came because I had blocked them. The silence that once terrified me now became peace. Every no was a reclamation, a fragment of freedom pieced back into place. Work gave me another source of strength. My commanders recognized the resilience I had shown and placed me in charge of projects that demanded precision and endurance. I thrived under the weight of responsibility. Leading a team to design new communication protocols for ships at sea, I felt the same satisfaction I had once felt solving equations in my bedroom, only now my work mattered to the world, not just to me. Colleagues who had seen the video no longer looked at me with pity. They saw me as a sailor who had endured and risen. Respect was no longer grudging or conditional. It was earned and clear. Outside of duty, I built a new kind of family. Fellow sailors became brothers and sisters who checked in without judgment. Friends gathered in my apartment on weekends, filling the rooms with laughter, food, and warmth I had never known at the Hayes dinner table. On holidays, when my parents once used guilt to keep me in line, I chose differently. I joined Lieutenant Morales and his family for Thanksgiving, where ambition was celebrated and boundaries were respected. For the first time, I left a holiday meal without feeling smaller. The foundation, too, began to grow. Donations arrived from veterans groups, from women's organizations, even from strangers who had seen the clip and wanted to support others like me. We awarded our first scholarships to 2 young women in Virginia who dreamed of becoming engineers. Reading their essays, I felt a surge of pride that eclipsed the bitterness of my past. My suffering had not been in vain. It had become a seed that grew into something stronger. As months turned into a year, the Hayes family faded from my daily thoughts. Richard resigned from his company under pressure from shareholders. Miranda vanished from public view, her name still whispered in Norfolk, but no longer wielding power. Ethan disappeared into obscurity, his future dimmed by choices he had made long before that day in San Diego. I did not celebrate their downfall, but I did not mourn it either. Their collapse was not my revenge. It was the natural consequence of truth catching up. One night, standing on the balcony of my apartment, I lifted a small telescope and tracked a satellite across the dark sky. It was part of a project I had helped design, a system orbiting thousands of miles above, yet still tethered to the effort of my hands and mind. Watching its faint glimmer cut across the stars, I felt a quiet certainty. I had built a life that no slap, no silence, no cruelty could erase. Independence was no longer fragile. It was the ground beneath my feet, the air in my lungs, the fire in my chest. The girl who once whispered vows in the shadows of Norfolk was gone. In her place stood a sailor, a leader, a woman who had chosen herself and would keep choosing herself. My scars remained faint but permanent, a map of survival. When I touched them now, I felt not shame, but strength. They reminded me of the night my family lost control of my story, and I claimed it back for good. Looking back now, I see that my life split into 2 clear halves, the years before the slap and the years after. For almost 2 decades, I was trained to believe that silence was survival, that sacrifice was the only way to prove love, that my worth was measured by how much I could give up for Ethan, while Miranda smiled and Richard looked away. The ceremony at Naval Base San Diego shattered that illusion. When Miranda struck me in uniform in front of hundreds with phones recording every second she exposed, not only her cruelty, but the entire system of control that had defined my childhood. And when the world saw it, I realized something powerful. I did not have to carry their shame anymore. The aftermath was messy, humiliating, and terrifying at times. Millions watched me stumble backward on that stage, blood rising on my cheek, my body swaying but refusing to collapse. Yet what once would have been used against me became proof of resilience. People replayed the clip not to laugh but to say, "She stood tall." In that moment, the story I thought would destroy me instead became my liberation. I think often about the word family. Miranda loved to use it as a weapon, insisting that family came first, that I should give without question, that loyalty meant silence. But I learned that family without respect is just a cage. True family is built on care, not control. Sometimes it is blood. Sometimes it is comrades you meet in the mud of boot camp. Sometimes it is strangers who send letters reminding you that your voice matters. The Navy became my family when the people at home refused to be. The consequences for Richard, Miranda, and Ethan were real. They lost contracts, scholarships, reputations. For a while, I wrestled with guilt. Had I destroyed them? But the truth is simpler. They destroyed themselves the moment they chose lies over love, silence over support, violence over dignity. My refusal to cover for them was not cruelty, it was clarity. What matters more than their downfall is what rose from the wreckage. I found purpose in building a foundation for others trapped in toxic households. I found strength in saying no without apology. I found belonging in the Navy where effort was honored, not erased. And I found peace in creating a home that was entirely my own, every square foot a testament to survival and choice. I share this now because I know there are people listening who feel the same weight I once carried, the weight of being told you are selfish for setting boundaries, the weight of being overlooked while another is praised, the weight of being controlled by those who call it love. Hear me clearly. Boundaries are not betrayal, they are survival. Saying no is not selfish. It is the first step toward freedom. So I stand here scarred but unbroken to tell you this: you are not alone. If your dignity is being stolen in the name of family, you have the right to reclaim it. If your voice is being silenced, you have the right to raise it. And if you are waiting for permission to choose yourself, let this story be that permission. When I walk past the harbor at San Diego now, the sound of gulls and the rhythm of the waves remind me how far I have come. I used to believe that my life would always orbit around the Hayes household, no matter how tightly I tried to break free. For years, I thought that running faster or working harder would finally win their recognition. But recognition built on control is not love, it is a leash. The moment Miranda's hand struck my face in front of witnesses, that leash snapped. What followed was not just chaos. It was a rebirth. I know some people see my story and focus only on the slap. They replay it again and again as though it is the whole narrative. But the truth is that slap was not an ending. It was a spark. It forced open a truth I had hidden even from myself, that I had spent too many years measuring my worth against people who never intended to honor it. The bruise faded, but the lesson will not. The Hayes name no longer holds me. Richard remains silent in his crumbling career. Miranda lives with her own reflection, one she can no longer polish for neighbors or colleagues. Ethan drifts without direction, no longer the golden boy. Their choices caught up to them as they were always bound to do. I do not need revenge to feel whole. Justice came through truth, not through vengeance. Their downfall is not my victory. My victory is standing here steady and free with a life built by my own hands. When I speak now, whether to sailors, to students, or to strangers who send letters, I remind them that survival is not shameful. For too long, we are taught to hide bruises, to swallow words, to excuse cruelty, because it comes from people we call family. But survival is strength. Speaking truth is not betrayal. It is the foundation of every kind of freedom worth having. To those listening who feel trapped, who wake every morning bracing for criticism or cruelty, I say this: you deserve more. You deserve safety, respect, and a future that belongs to you. Do not let anyone convince you that your boundaries are selfish. Boundaries are the blueprint of dignity. Without them, control thrives. With them, you thrive. If you take one lesson from my journey, let it be this: you do not have to wait for the world to give you permission to stand tall. You already have that right. I stood on a stage with blood on my face and chose not to bow my head. You can choose too. So here is my final message. If you have endured cruelty in the name of love, speak. If your dignity has been stripped in the name of loyalty, resist. And if you fear that no one will hear you, know this: you are not alone. My story reached across states and screens, across oceans even, not because I am special, but because truth always carries farther than silence. Type justice. If you believe no parent, no step-parent, no family member should ever control your future through fear, and tell me where you are watching from. I want to know how far this truth reaches, because every voice, every comment, every story added to mine is another step toward a world where silence no longer protects cruelty. Together, we can make that world real. If you have stayed with me until this point, I know you feel the weight of what happened and the strength it took to stand up against it. I want to speak to you directly now, not as Samantha Hayes, the Navy sailor, not as someone who had her moment captured on video for the world to debate, but as a human being who knows the quiet ache of being overlooked, controlled, and dismissed. I know some of you have scars that no one else can see. I know some of you carry the memory of voices that told you that you were never enough, and I know many of you, especially those of you in your 50s and beyond, have lived long enough to realize that some wounds do not heal by themselves. They linger until we give ourselves permission to face them. When my stepmother raised her hand and struck me, she thought she was silencing me. She thought she was stamping authority on a stage built on control. But what she did instead was push me into clarity. Pain sharpened my vision. In that moment, I saw the truth that had been waiting all along. Silence was not survival anymore, it was surrender. I chose differently, and I want you to know you can too. Think about the ways people have tried to make you small. Maybe it was a boss who took credit for your work. Maybe it was a partner who told you that your dreams were childish. Maybe it was a sibling who believed they had the right to your savings, your time, or your peace. Or maybe it was your own parent, the very person who was supposed to protect you, who instead told you that sacrifice was your duty while respect was optional. If any of this rings true, then you already know that silence does not keep the peace, it only prolongs the cruelty. This is the moment where I ask you to pause. Right here, right now. Close your eyes for a breath and imagine the one boundary you wish you could set. Is it saying no to a demand that drains you? Is it refusing to let a relative guilt you into paying for something you cannot afford? Is it finally telling a friend or a partner that you will not accept disrespect anymore? Whatever it is, hold that thought, because that boundary is not selfish, it is survival. I want you to take that thought and write it in the comments. Yes, right now. Write no if you have ever had to stand up against a demand that stripped you of dignity. Write justice if you believe that no person should be humiliated in the name of family pride. And write the place you are watching from, because every location added is proof that this conversation is bigger than one household, bigger than one slap, bigger than one toxic tradition. When people across America and beyond type those words together, it builds a chorus. It says, "To anyone still trapped in silence, you are not alone." It says to anyone still carrying bruises, your pain is real and your story matters. And it says to those who excuse cruelty by hiding behind family loyalty, we see you and we will not accept it anymore. You might think that leaving a comment does not matter, that it is just words on a screen. But I am telling you now, it matters. When I was lying in that hospital bed scrolling through messages from strangers, each word felt like a lifeline. People I had never met wrote to me saying they believed me, saying they had lived it too, saying they stood with me. That was the moment I realized solidarity is stronger than silence. Every comment is a piece of solidarity. Every no, every justice, every location listed is a light in someone else's darkness. And I want to go further. I want you not only to comment, but to share. Share this story with someone you know is struggling with a toxic household. Share it with someone younger who believes they have to earn respect through endless sacrifice. Share it with someone older who still carries shame about the boundaries they never got to set. Sharing is not about numbers or views. Sharing is about survival. When truth spreads, lies lose their power. This is where your role begins. Do not underestimate it. My story is one piece, but yours matters just as much. If you are reading this, it means you have the strength to face painful truths. Now take the next step. Comment, share, and if you are brave enough, write your own boundary out loud. Even one sentence is enough, because what you declare here does not disappear. It joins with thousands of other voices, and together we create something no slap, no shout, no control can erase. I know that some of you are reading this and thinking, "It is too late for me. My children are grown. My parents are gone. My bruises have faded. What good would it do to speak now?" Let me tell you this. It is never too late. Boundaries are not only for the young. They are for anyone who still has a heartbeat and a voice. When you set a boundary today, you are not just protecting yourself. You are teaching those who come after you that dignity is possible at any age. You are showing them that survival is not a shameful story whispered in private, but a proud choice spoken out loud. When my story spread online, I was shocked to see how many older viewers wrote to me. Men and women in their 50s, 60s, even 70s sent messages saying, "I wish I had stood up the way you did." Some told me they had lived entire lifetimes under the weight of parents who demanded too much, or partners who dismissed them, or families who never valued their effort. They said my refusal gave them courage. Some of them even took that step after decades of silence. They told their siblings no. They told their children they would not be controlled. They told their friends that respect was no longer optional. And do you know what happened? They found peace. It was not too late. It never is. So here is my challenge to you. Think of one thing in your life you have always wished you had the courage to say. One sentence you have held inside for too long. Then write it in the comments. You do not have to explain the details. You do not have to name names. Just write the sentence. Maybe it is, I will not be your bank anymore. Maybe it is, I deserve to be respected. Maybe it is, no means no. Write it, and in doing so, you claim it. That act alone can begin to loosen the chains of silence. And then tell me where you are from. Every city, every state, every country listed in the comments is a map of resilience. It shows that no matter where we come from, the struggle is shared and the stand is universal. When someone in Virginia sees that someone in California, someone in Texas, someone in New York, someone in Florida has typed the same words, they realize they are part of something bigger. And when someone in another country writes it too, the circle widens even more. That map of comments is proof that we are not isolated victims. We are a movement. Do not think your voice is too small. Silence survives because people believe their words do not matter, but every too small voice added together becomes unstoppable. That is what scared Miranda most when the video spread. Not just that people saw her strike me, but that people everywhere spoke about it, shared it, named it what it was: abuse. She lost control not because of one video, but because thousands of voices joined the truth. Now imagine what happens when thousands of voices join again. Imagine a comment section filled with people declaring boundaries, typing justice, shouting no to exploitation, marking their hometowns like stars in a night sky. Someone lost in despair might read it and realize they are not as alone as they feared. That alone can save lives. So I am asking you, no, I am urging you. Do not just watch, do not just scroll. Add your voice, add your story, add your boundary, add your city. Let this not be just my fight, but ours together. Because family should mean safety, not scars. Respect should not be earned through endless sacrifice. And love without dignity is not love at all. If you believe that, then type justice. If you have ever had to fight back against control, type no. If you want the world to see that survival belongs to all of us, share where you are watching from. Let us build that chorus together. And when you do remember this, every word you write is a declaration that silence has ended. It is a promise that cruelty hidden in living rooms, at family tables, in offices, and communities will no longer pass unchallenged. It is proof that dignity is not disposable. I stood on a stage with a bruise on my face and refused to bow. Now it is your turn. You do not need a stage, you only need your voice. Use it now.